Hi, my name is Stanley Koblakwa, and you're welcome to another educative and exciting edition of China Now. There are so many things happening across the world, and this is the only platform that seeks to bring you all that information and more. Let's start with China Currents, where Kris, our host, has a lineup of stories to help you understand some happenings and most talked about discussions on social, economic, and political issues happening in today's China. This will also include China's entertainment industry, how it is recovering steadily from COVID-19, and the Sino-American relation and diplomacy in China. Please stay.
China Current is a weekly news talk show from China to the world. We cover viral news about China every week and also give you the newest updates on China's cutting-edge technologies. Let's get started. Hello, welcome to China Currents. I'm Kris. First, 端午节快乐! Happy belated Dragon Boat Festival. The past weekend, from June 22nd to 24th, was China's traditional Dragon Boat Festival, a holiday in which we get to eat zongzi, a kind of rice dumpling, and sail dragon boats. Originally, it's a traditional holiday that commemorates the life and death of the famous Chinese scholar Qu Yuan. Lately, it's become a time for people to reunite with families and go on vacations. The holiday weekend's weather, nonetheless, was intense. In northern China, temperature exceeded 37 degrees Celsius. The daily maximum temperature at 21 national stations have broken historical records. Beijing and Tianjin reached as high as 41.8 degrees Celsius, but in southern China, it's a completely different story. Heavy rain was pouring down, with up to 140 millimeters of rain in some urban areas. But none of that could stop the Chinese people from going out. Despite the weather, approximately 100 million people went on vacation. That was about 10% more than the pre-COVID average. Here's a clip of people participating in the traditional dragon boat race. Well, that was a ton of fun, right? That's not the end. People also packed up movie theaters. According to real-time data, as of June 24th, the total box office for the 2023 Dragon Boat Festival weekend exceeded 900 million, ranking second in the history of China's Dragon Boat Festival box office. The total number of moviegoers reached 22.25 million, with a total of 1.3 million screenings. The moviegoers are back in town. People on social media were praising the quality of the movies during the holiday weekend, which is an indication of the recovery of the entertainment industry from COVID. That's the Chinese optimism about the economic recovery. Next up, from June 18th to 19th, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited China. He was the first Secretary of State who visited China in 5 years. Last time was 2018 during the Trump administration. Blinken's visit was originally scheduled in February, nevertheless was delayed by the so-called spy balloon incident. Using the Chinese government's words, the Sino-American relation is at the lowest point at this moment. Since Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan last August, the two countries have been in conflict over a number of issues, including US officials visiting Taiwan, the so-called spy balloon, US spying activities over the South China Sea, etc. On June 18th, Blinken held talk with Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang. According to Chinese state media, the 6-hour meeting was in-depth and constructive, which concerned the overall China-US relations, made agreement on 4 sectors, including maintaining high-level contacts. Well, when communicating is the only consensus of a marathon meeting, it was obvious that both sides held quite a lot of differences over fundamental issues. On the next day, Blinken met with Chinese President Xi Jinping. According to Xinhua News, the meeting was merely out of courtesy. Xi called on the US side to adopt a rational and pragmatic attitude to avoid major country competition and to respect China's legitimate rights and interests. Of course, we have no idea what exactly were the fundamental differences that Blinken and the Chinese officials argued behind closed doors. Yet their press release revealed some clues. In Blinken's press interview, he specifically stressed, quote, "I reiterated long-standing US One China policy. That policy has not changed. We do not support Taiwan independence. We remain opposed to any unilateral changes to the status quo by either side." Unquote. Did Chinese people buy Blinken's words? Most likely not. On Chinese social media, netizens summarized Blinken's response and American policy toward Taiwan into one Chinese saying, 说一套,做一套. Say one thing and do another. After all, it's quite hard to persuade the Chinese people that the US is complying with the One China principle when it continues to send government officials to the island, not to mention its military presence in the Taiwan Strait. Another interesting point in Blinken's interview was his wording of One China policy. You may have noticed the Chinese wording for the similar stuff is One China principle. There is a huge difference to that. The One China principle means there is only one sovereign state under the name of China, with the PRC serving as the sole legitimate government of that China, and Taiwan is an inalienable part of China. But what exactly does America's One China policy mean? According to Blinken, it means not supporting Taiwan independence, opposing to any unilateral changes to the status quo by either side, and conduct the Taiwan issue within the framework of Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 joint communique, and the 6 assurances. Very vague and jargonish language, right? It's not our fault. So let me translate that for you. It means nothing concrete. The One China policy is a product of the so-called strategic ambiguity. You see, US and China did not have any formal diplomatic relations from 1949 to early 1970s. In 72, Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger went to Beijing. They were like, let's end our beef and fight the Soviet Union. Beijing agreed. Hey, great, let's put aside the differences and do a communique together. Hence, the 3 communiques that formed the basis of the Sino-American relations. Basically, the communiques were like, okay, here's a bunch of stuff that we don't agree with each other. Vietnam, imperialism, colonialism, blah, 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 blah. The list goes on. But hey, nothing is as important as countering the threat of Soviet Union. So let's be friends. But Taiwan is such a core issue to China. There was no way for the United States to dodge this one. They had to declare something. So here's what Nixon and Kissinger said. The United States acknowledges that all Chinese on either side of the Taiwan Strait maintain there is but one China, and that Taiwan is part of China. And United States government does not challenge that position. Acknowledge. What a magical word. When relationship is great and no conflict of interest is formed, acknowledgement means acceptance. Just like what the Clinton administration did. However, when the United States want to challenge the bilateral relationship, acknowledge suddenly becomes a classical imperialist word. It means, although America will not support Taiwan independence publicly, it nevertheless will try everything that it can to foster a de facto independence. The Americans were like, as long as we don't define our action as pro-separatism, they're not. Well, by this logic, all we need for world peace is a new dictionary that redefines war into peace. Easy, done. Is that what you got from Harvard? So, back to the original point. Does Blinken's promise on the One China policy mean anything? Hardly. America is using Taiwan to drag China, and US will foreseeably try everything to strengthen that drag. US's One China policy is a weak promise without any actual action. Is a promise alive if it doesn't come true, or is it just something worse? People in Taiwan are thus, sadly, becoming America's tool in containing China of an issue that ought to be sorted out internally between the Chinese in both mainland and Taiwan. Next up, last week many Chinese received a text message from their telecom carrier. The text, carrying the commendation from the Central Publicity Department, praises the flying crew of the Air Force, listing them as role models of the times and applauding their courageous deeds in air combat in a new era. That text is unexpected and kind of vague. It did not mention the exact reason why this aviation unit got this commendation. By the way, it's one of the highest commendations in China. So people start to dig on the internet and become a hot trending topic on social media. So after some time of digging, netizens suspected that the aviation unit is responsible for driving away the Reagan aircraft carrier in South China Sea. According to a picture that shows the course of the USS Ronald Reagan, it took a dramatic, nearly 90 degrees turn in South China Sea, a move that large vessels seldom do. The Chinese state media lately reviewed a footage of the aviation unit saying they had successfully driven away alien vessels and aircrafts. Well, you don't get a commendation on national level just because some small boats and outdated aircrafts. So the netizens' guesses have suddenly become plausible. The commendation happened at an interesting time as well. You see, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken had just left Beijing, and as we have just mentioned, the bilateral talk did not go on smooth. Also, during Blinken's visit, the United States did not pause its military action in the South China Sea. So the commendation on the Chinese side can be seen as a response to both the talk and America's military action. Next up, the Chinese EV maker NIO recently received a large investment from the Middle East. On June 20th, NIO signed an agreement with Abu Dhabi investment firm CYVN Holdings. According to the agreement, the UAE fund will make a strategic investment of approximately $1.1 billion in NIO through a combination of issuing new shares and transferring existing shares. CYVN Holdings is an investment firm in which the Abu Dhabi government holds a majority stake. When the Chinese social media netizens considered money as a crucial investment for NIO as of this moment, since the company has been in debt for quite a long time. A lot of people thought UAE has done a great investment, for it has secured them a promising share in what could become the future giant in automobile industry. Last but not least, the Chinese tech giant Alibaba announced a shift in the board of directors. Zhang Yong, chairman and CEO of Alibaba Group Holding, will step down as chairman and CEO on September 10th of this year. At the same time, with the approval of the Alibaba Group Holding Board of Directors, Executive Vice Chairman Cai Chongxin will be appointed as chairman of Alibaba Group Holding. Wu Yongmin will assume the role of Alibaba Group Holding CEO. Chinese netizens see these as a result of Alibaba's failure in business in the past few years. The new CEO is perceived as a close ally of Jack Ma, who stepped down a few years ago. And the new chairman, Cai Chongxin, the owner of NBA team Brooklyn Nets, was one of the founding members of Alibaba. The change of Alibaba's board of directors reflects the company's dilemma. As many netizens commented, they have become less frequent users of Taobao, Alibaba's online shopping platform, in recent years. Alibaba is no longer as dominant as it used to be, and people are eager to see if the changes in board could save the company's future. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you for watching this episode of China Currents. If you have any thoughts or comments about our show, please feel free to reach us at the email address below. I'm Kris, looking forward to hearing from you. See you next week.
Well, that's all on today's China Currents. Now let's go ahead to Threshold, where Lisa will bring to us details of some astonishing technological innovations happening in China. In this episode, Lisa will expatiate on how the country is battling all odds and hurdles to printing 3D artificial organs, which will help save lives of patients who need immediate transplants. Over to you, Lisa.
Every day, there are 17 people die waiting for an organ transplant, and every 10 minutes, another person is added to the transplant waiting list. To save more lives, scientists all around the world are researching on artificial organs. 3D printing may have something to offer. Hi, I'm Lisa, and this is Threshold in China, a segment that gives you a taste of the future before it actually happens. Let's talk about new tech of organ 3D printing. The current organ printing technique faces several challenges. In most 3D bioprinting methods, the bio-ink needs to be pushed out smoothly and then quickly made stable so that the printed structure stays in place. The 3D printing of organs, human cells are usually the key ingredient of the bio-ink. If the cells are not held in place, they could be damaged and the structure would not be correct. The next challenge is making the exact replicas of the complex organs, complete with intricate internal structures such as the blood vessel. If a heart you are printing do not have blood vessel to support the muscle cells, nourishing them with nutrients from the blood, the cell won't survive and the organ will be useless. To print an organ filled with vitality, scientists from Beijing's Tsinghua University decided to infuse it with spirit. SPIRIT stands for Sequential Printing in a Reversible Ink Template. The sequential printing here refers to the 2 stages of 3D printing involved. The first stage is to print the complex geometrical structure of an organ that contains chambers. The structure could then be used as a template, providing support for the second stage, when the blood vessel network is printed. The secret to SPIRIT is the special bio-ink it uses. One of the key ingredients in the bio-ink is microgel, which has an amazing ability to heal itself. This healing works kind of like how jelly reforms itself after being cut. The microgel used in SPIRIT contains the same substance as gelatin, which allows it to heal at any point after it's printed.
Another important ingredient in the bio-ink is the stem cells wrapped up in the microgel. When the microgel is printed, it forms an organ structure containing chambers. The structure provides a framework or scaffold for the stem cells it carries to attach on and grow into muscle cells of the organ. How to print the fine lacework of blood vessels with narrow channels? The slim, hollow space inside the blood vessels are too complicated to print using conventional technique. After all, you can't directly print the void. So instead, the scientists decide to print a network of blood vessels with ink that can be washed away later, creating the voids. The ink used can dissolve in water or other solvents, so it can be easily removed without damaging the organ. They print this ink directly into the gel-like organ structure freshly made from the first stage. And they have to do it quickly before the microgel form a solid structure. Thanks to the microgel bio-ink's self-healing ability, they are able to do this without the worry of damaging the structure because the open wound on the printed material can quickly heal. After the printing is completed, and wait until the microgel structure is set, leaving behind a small organ with a complex vascular network.
After 14 days, the heart muscle cell will have grown and covered the whole organ, which will begin to beat like a real heart. So how good is it according to the threshold standards? Well, let's move on to the threshold rating system: readiness, novelty, and potential impact or rippleness. As we mentioned before, the readiness category refers to the maturity of a technology, from lab demonstration, that is a 1, to mass production, that is a 5. The novelty score refers to how new the innovation is. 1 means small differentiation to existing technology, and 5 means that the innovation fulfills a new function. Finally, the ripple scale, as we call it, is our opinion of a technology's potential for life-changing impact and how widely it can be applied elsewhere. So how does SPIRIT technique stack up? The organ printed by researchers from Tsinghua University is actually not quite an organ, but an organoid. Although they have the essential characteristics of an organ, such as muscle construction in this case, organoids are much smaller and are usually grown in laboratory. In other words, it's just a proof of concept for now. The researchers didn't say when they might be able to scale up to print a real organ. There are still hurdles to overcome before the SPIRIT technique could have widespread applications. As the researchers pointed out, structures printed with the soft microgel-based bio-ink may not be strong enough to hold their shape or withstand external forces. It is clear from this that the technology is still at a very early stage of development, which is why it is a 2 in readiness. The biggest innovation of this SPIRIT technique is that it enables the printing of complex vascular system through which fluids such as blood can flow. This is revolutionary in organ printing, and it is a 4 on the novelty scale. As for the potential influence, as mentioned earlier, there is a long waiting list for organ transplant. Any meaningful steps towards meeting this demand could have a huge impact on millions of lives. So it is a solid 4 on the ripple scale. With 4 on 2 categories, you can see the SPIRIT is high, only that it takes time to cultivate. There's probably one more person on the waiting list since we started. Clearly, the ability to print organs cheaply and on a large scale has huge economic and social implications. There is also the added benefit of eliminating the use of immunosuppressants during post-transplant care, since an organ printed from the patient's own cell samples has little chance of being rejected, unlike being donated an organ from another human being. As to the ethical issue, consider that illegal organ trafficking may be completely eliminated if organ can be printed cheaply and may even perform better. I'm also wondering about other possibilities with this innovation. If the brain is just another organ, can that be printed someday too? And what about muscles, ligaments, or skin? How far before organ printing becomes so advanced that we start to redefine what it means to build artificial intelligence? A 3D printer replicating a flesh and blood human being. So how far do you think 3D bioprinting can go? As usual, we look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Lisa. Well, that's all for Threshold. I hope you enjoyed every bit of the updates on amazing tech innovations happening in China. Let's continue the show with Overlap, which is a collaborative production between Breakthrough and Wave Media. Today, it features a discussion between host Belinda Lee, an AI researcher at MIT, and Zhou, chief science editor at China Academy. They'll be discussing AI development and rapid changes in technology and how citizens of China and the US are embracing the developments so far. Keep watching.
Welcome to Overlap, brought to you by Breakthrough News and Wave Media. My name is Belinda Lee. I am an AI researcher at MIT. I'm excited to be joined by Linwen Zhou, Chief Science Editor at China Academy from China.
Thank you, Belinda.
Yeah. So there has been a lot of fear in the US about the development of AI, and I'm curious to know what the conversations in China have been about the topic. Are people in China afraid of the rapid changes in technology?
Yeah, afraid, but mostly excited and curious about what you can do next. And actually, well, here's another thing about China, because the like of GPT and many things, language models developed in the US is not available in China. Most Chinese just don't have the access. So for the most tech savvy population of Chinese, they get a taste of that, so they are quite impressed, and of course they're worried about their job. I think there's the same thing across the world. And also, despite Chinese firms have developed a lot of similar language models, by one account there's like 30 language models launched by Chinese firms, but most of them are just at the stage of internal testing. So just ordinary people just can't have access of that. So actually, maybe in the future when everyone can use it, they have they should have a different attitude toward the new technology. Of course, people are worried because in China, I think the first victim are the gaming industry, because many game companies making computer games, they just lay off those illustrators. They use AI to create image, so they can shrink the team of their graphic designer, illustrator from usually they used to have 10 people. Now they just use three people to work in the graphic design team. So yeah, of course, that's a real threat to the jobs. But another thing is, I think it's a key difference between Chinese and the US is that we have normally have a higher trust on our government, so we don't really worry about they use AI to watch us. We feel it may be safer for us if they use that in the civilian cameras. So yeah, that's generally very different sentiment to the police, to the government. So it's quite So on the job side, I think we share the concerns of the Americans. Yeah, like I said moments ago, because not many people have used that, have tried the GPT yet. So that just doesn't have just didn't create such strong public opinion against it. So maybe as time goes by, maybe there will be stronger sentiment, among the society as a whole.
Yeah, so I think these corporations as well, there's another possible fear is, these corporations right now, especially among researchers like myself, these OpenAI, for example, a lot of these corporations are kind of consolidating, the technologies within these corporations. So you can see they also get to decide who gets access and who doesn't, and kind of, how these models are trained. And so right now, only OpenAI and then Google and then I assume some Baidu as well has these resources to train these technologies. But in the US, for example, that makes it so that very few, these very few powerful corporations get to control both the direction of research and also how these technologies are built. And OpenAI, for example, has decided not to release any source code. Really, they should be called closed AI, because they started the precedent of not releasing source code and not releasing just anything, any papers or any details about their model, about their training data. There's complete lack of transparency there. So there's a lot of fear.
Made the point too. I think.
Sorry,
Elon
what?
Musk. Well, well, as Elon Musk once said that too. He said OpenAI just no longer open anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Elon Musk obviously has his own agenda, but so in many ways, it's hampers both, as researchers, our ability to build new technologies, and the way that we can innovate is we really depend on these companies to whatever they can give us, we depend on them. So there's fears among researchers there, but also there's fears among how do we even regulate these technologies if they're not being transparent about how they're training their models, and what is going into their models, and how they're being built, and even how big these models are. We know absolutely nothing. So it's hard also to, on the safety side, regulate it from researchers can't really regulate these models either.
The landscape in China could be more quite different, because the market is more fragmented. Yeah, like I say, we have 30-something companies are doing the same thing. I think one of the big reasons for this is the limit of computing power. So because, as we all know, large models require the high performance GPU to do that. But as a result of the US embargo on China of the GPU, so we just don't have that computing power. So instead, many companies, they opt for training smaller models doing more specific tasks. So it's not like going to OpenAI. They can monopolize the whole market. So they were, I think, the company like Alibaba, well, they're the biggest, but they still try to integrate their technology into some specific manufacturing industry area to do that. It's quite smaller model. So we don't have right now, we don't have the worry about, well, one company, two company can just monopolize the whole market. And also, of course, we all know that in the last few years, those big tech companies in China are highly regulated by the government already. So we know government will come out on top, because, well, it's quite different culture here. So I think China, people see this as quite a big opportunity, because it will make the machine smarter. So we're quite into manufacturing, so maybe you could upgrade our manufacturing, so people see it more like an opportunity than a threat. Actually, Chinese government, well, one of the agencies have released a draft about regulations. They just ask for comments from the industry, but well, they set the guidance framework. They just say very basic things. Say, well, it should align to our interests. It shouldn't threat our national security. They should have to things and technology to serve the people. And I think they basically embrace it with an open mind. But of course, they are quite aware of the threats. Actually, well, because China now is doing catch up to the US in this. So I think they hesitate to over-regulate that, because that will stifle the innovation. So, well, I think in the US could be similar. I mean, in the normal context, maybe they want to regulate this, but in the context of the China-US competition in technology, they might be hesitate to over-regulate it too. So they want their technology to get ahead, to stay ahead forever. So but in China, I also see the government released a guidance on the robotic industry. They say the AI should be incorporated into the robotic industry, and they see the robotic industry as the next car industry. As we know, China have a success in the EV industry, and because the car industry have a very long supply chain, so it could leave all the boats. And they hope the robotic industry will do the same to Chinese industries, because, well, you know, it involves a lot of like manufacturer for the material, for the chips, for the softwares. So it could be very strategic. So I think robotic and AI put together, we see that, well, they try to have a strategy in this so-called the fourth industrial revolution. They just can't afford to be lag behind in this. You see, right now the large language models are, well, they all stay in the computer, right? They have to connect to the physical world via those Internet of Things gadgets, via robotics, and I think that's the future that will take a lot of employment. So because you see, if you just develop a software, you just need a certain company to do that, like Microsoft, like Google, they already do that. But in terms of designing robot to serve the people, like service robot, like industrial robots, each scenario, each application are very specific. They may need more engineers do that. So that may, well, take more employment. And we see this as opportunity. So, but yeah, and this leads to another point I want to make, because in China, we value education very much. So many parents are just nervous. They're always nervous. Well, tiger moms, tiger dad, like that. But, well, they're asking questions. What should we teach our kids so they can have a job in 10 years or in 20 years? Because in China, all the students just immerse themselves in study and doing math all the time and learning languages. But with the AI, they're getting stronger, getting better by the matter of the day. We have to ask, should we change the way we teach our students, we teach our kids? Not just to recite those things, not just to do to solve the math problem, because AI could do that, obviously. So the next thing is we're thinking about maybe we should teach something more, teach them to be more creative. But yeah, to being creative, everyone will say they need to be creative, but specifically how? So we will see. Because I'm at the same time educator. I designing curriculum for young kids to do the STEAM project, so to solve real life problems. So the educators in China, we're thinking about it. Some of us were thinking about maybe robotics is the area, and we can expand it. So and there's another trend in China, because we have an aging population. So for the first time in recent history, we have a shrinking population. Last year, the birth rate is down. So, well, I'm thinking about maybe in 20 years, I'm going to retire, but who's going to take care of me? Maybe robots. Maybe we just look our neighbor, like Japan. I think they are trying to do that for a long time to develop all kinds of robots. But now we have those AIs, language model, make the robot smarter. So maybe, with the advance of the robotic technology, they can do a lot of service to people, to the elderly. Is quite a big market opportunity for that, and also solve our problem. So on one hand is education for the kids, and on another hand is for the elderly. So we see this as pillars of our society, because we have those family culture. We have to take care of the kids and the elderly. So maybe, well, who knows?
That sounds great. Yeah, it sounds like definitely, in China, there's, everyone feels like they could kind of collectively benefit from this technology. Yeah, it just feels like this is a really great opportunity to can harness the power of this technology to actually see benefits to the people. But in the US, a lot of these powerful people, like Sam Altman, Elon Musk, are also pushing this narrative as well of look, we can kind of revolutionize the way we do a lot of things. But there's also a lot of anxiety as well from just normal workers about who does this actually really benefit? Even despite that, like already like we see that like, for example, BuzzFeed is trying to replace journalists with like AI, and like firing a bunch of like human journalists in favor of AI. We see in the Writers Guild, right? Like they're currently striking because one of the core demands is that like, humans writers should not be replaced by AI. So already like corporations are thinking of many creative ways to try and leverage, these large language models, these existing AI technologies to replace human workers. And among that, like we see lots of people having fears around their jobs being replaced. But also there's people who are like concerned about like the consequences of, what these technologies could have on when released to the public. Like there's the potential for these technologies to be used to create deep fakes. You can have like, you can put an image of a person and like have them say something that they totally did not say, and like people would not be able to tell the difference. These technologies could be leveraged for producing large amounts of fake news and misinformation. In the education sector, there's a big concern around plagiarism and kind of the consequences of having these large language models, and like if you have a writing assignment or a coding assignment, even like how do you make sure that the student didn't just generate it from GPT-4 or GPT-3, and a lot of artists also like have concerns around copyright. Artists need to produce these works to like survive, right? And if we have these AI artists that like can produce in less than 1 second like a great piece of art, then artists are under like threat of being replaced. Already we see in the US like there's an intensifying like homelessness crisis. As unemployment increases, this crisis will just intensify. Now, I guess what I want to kind of speak to is also like the funding sources for OpenAI and these big tech companies, and also like how these technologies really were built. So OpenAI started kind of as a nonprofit. Essentially, like they had this grandiose mission of very much speaking to like what is being currently felt in China right now, but like they put it as their message to like, we want to build technologies that benefit all of humanity, and we're not beholden to like stakeholders or anyone else that like wants to profit from this. But now 6 years later, we see that they're actually a for-profit company, and they're very closely partnered with Microsoft. So it seems like there's this different image between like what they're trying to put out and also versus what their actions concretely are. And so with OpenAI, with OpenAI especially, Microsoft invested a large sum of money into these technologies. But also like when they built these technologies, it was, these technologies like large language models, they are trained from large amounts of text on the internet, large amounts of books, ebook sizes on the internet, like Wikipedia text, and also like, news articles that were written by journalists. So essentially it's like, taking a large amount of kind of unpaid labor that people have put out on the internet, and harnessing that to like train the model. And really what these models are built off of is like this unpaid labor. And on the other hand, outsourcing like a lot of labeling effort to other countries, and paying people very low wages to do that labeling for them. So there was like that Times article about how OpenAI used Kenyan workers to kind of rate, whether or not like this training data is toxic or not, and whether or not we want to include it in the pre-training data for a language model. And they paid them only like $2 an hour. So basically, like these technologies themselves are kind of being built off the backs of either unpaid or low-wage labor. And then after that, like they're being used to try and replace the same workers whose work came in to like actually build these technologies. And also we see as well, like it's built off of the labor of a lot of researchers as well, because before OpenAI, a lot of research, actually almost all of research in the field was open source. It was like all the code was released, the whole training data, the entire papers are released. But OpenAI, started this trend of like closing off models. So essentially, they're also building off of decades of open source research, and then privatizing that. Once again, like we see that dynamic between like, kind of this ruling class power, these powerful corporations trying to use and monopolize like technologies that should, were built off the backs of all of us and should be going to benefit all of us.
Yeah, but one thing different in China because is that most of the data are already owned by those the company platforms like the platforms of Alibaba and those Tencent. So it's already owned by those platforms. It's not quite open to anyone. So it creates problems. Yeah, because only those companies they have enough data to train their model. And this is one thing. And another thing is open source movement is not quite big in China, like in the US. So we don't. So the start point is quite different. So we never have that openly available massive amount of data to train the language model. So we kind of know from the beginning those things are owned by the companies, owned by the private firms. So yeah, of course, as they grow stronger, we may have the similar problem like the US. And also, as you mentioned, all those open source movement is not quite big in China, like in the US. So yeah, so we don't have the similar problem to start from the beginning. Yeah, and I think another thing is the ownership of those AIs. Maybe we have to figure out a better ownership. I think, yeah, in China it's the same thing, just owned by the private companies. So maybe in the future, well, we should have a different ownership structure. So like, well, owned by the people, really owned by the people, and so that those things, the AIs and the machines can work for everyone. And yeah, it sounds like, well, the true socialist states, and well, and maybe even a welfare state. So we have a robot working, so nobody worry about losing job because we don't have to work. That could be a bright future. Just I don't know how to achieve it. Yeah, because in China there's a new study. The scientists using GPT-4 as a membrane scientist. That is the scientist that designed experiment. So they use GPT-4 to design experiment. Yeah, it's fine. He can do that. Design a biology experiment, and he designed the experiment. He posed the hypothesis, design experiment, and analyze data, draw conclusions, and write the code to formulate the model for that study. So he can do the full package of things. So even the scientists could lose their job. So maybe the AI scientists may be the last one to lose their job for their own project. As to those ethic problems, like, well, AI making fake stuff, fake videos. I think we can use fight fire with fire. Just use AI to do that. Such thing like a GPT-0 which can spot the text written by AI. So the AI could spot that, could find out that. So maybe it's just a competition between technology, between different AIs. We can use AI to fight AI. I mean, yeah. And also now we have some open source language models. Maybe everyone with technology, with the know-how, the knowledge, can train their models. Maybe can, well, just make things better. And another thing is, well, I talk about that the collective ownership. Actually, in China we have a pilot project about that, but just with the solar panel, with solar powers. Like they built a solar power farm in a village, and they register a company that own the solar farm, and the revenue all goes to the villagers. So basically, all the villagers are the shareholder of this company, so everyone can benefit. So maybe, well, with AI, we can have like AI power factory that's, well, everyone in the village or in the community could be the shareholder, just like this pilot project in China. Yeah, they have this pilot project in the Western China. So yeah, so maybe, yeah, who knows?
Wow, that sounds amazing.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
true communism.
Yeah,
I would say cyber communism.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like I feel like it's definitely just, a function of like the society and like kind of the government and the political situation. Like these technologies, solar panels and AI like have just so much ability to be used for good, right? Like they could lead to like this brighter future.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, it's like a function of like, really who gets to say like how these technologies are deployed. Are they actually being used to serve the people? And that's like a function of political power, and all these political questions. And
Actually, our society should evolve with technology. So we have to rethink our society, maybe the structure of our society, also the structure of the firms, companies, private companies. It's not like an eternal structure. We have
yeah,
a company. It's just a invention of 17th century
yeah,
invention, the private company. So maybe at some point in the future, we have to ditch that. We have a new structure. We need to have a new structure, social structure with that,
for
go
sure.
with that. So yeah, it's more like, well, it's like the communist will say, as the productivity grows, you need to have a different superstructure. Yeah, I mean that means the social structure, right? So maybe at some point we're approaching that point, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. You spoke to this a little bit previously, but like, there's a competition right now between the US and China. Data and information is not being shared across this gap. And like, just imagine like the innovative power of like, if we could have like a more collaborative relationship, we have all the people like, we're, the same, right? Like we have shared interests, we have like shared common goals, etc. But like, yeah, like under like this capitalist framework, right? Like we have this competitive relationship between companies, this competitive relationship across nations, especially given that the US has this like very capitalist mindset, and China is like more socialist country. But like if we are able to like leverage the power of like the people in both the US and China, like I think obviously that would lead to like a much greater rate of innovation than we already have now. A lot of the fears that people have in the US around this technology really are just like, fears about capitalism, right? Like fears about losing their jobs, fears about, misinformation and fake news and how like these things are being deployed. Like that's not being decided democratically. That's just being decided by like, whatever is most profitable. So a lot of these fears are driven really by capitalism and not by like the technology itself. To really get to that point where like we no longer have those fears, like we would have to see a change in the social structure. And it would take, all of us as people, uniting to really get to that point. Either way, I think we're gonna have to leave it there. There's so much more we can discuss, but that's for another time. Thanks for watching Overlap, and we'll see you next time.
That's all for today's edition of China Now. I hope you had an amazing time while we learned together. I look forward to hearing your thoughts, comments, feedbacks, and suggestions. So kindly share them with us through the email provided below. My name is Stanley Koblako. See you same time next week.